Ike, your general thoughts on immigration and any responses to everything that Rutendo said to now?
It is amazing when people try to rewrite history. They try to revise the history of which, yeah, it is something else. When he speaks of people going to exile, I can tell you by 94, we had about 25,000 applicators, about 45,000 MK cadres. That will give you the picture of how many people went to exile. It's not the whole country, half of the population who went to exile. Bob Miriam Makeba, mabafika ngale. They continued the struggle. They didn't do garden work. They didn't work at fish and chips. The people whom Benson said they lived in suburb, there are very few, exceptional. Few people in leadership where they lived in Zambia, like Abu Oliver Tambo lived in Zambia. But the rest of their comrades and cadres, they were living in Kuma camps in horrible conditions. Hence, they protested. Hence, the MK killed more of their own than apartheid government killed Umkhonto weSizwe, because they were protesting, saying, when are we going back to South Africa and fight? You cannot be living here, Guma camps. The situation is horrible. That's why I think in Tanzania, if I'm confusing in Tanzania and Uganda, they killed 17 PAC of members because they were saying, we cannot live here, under these circumstances. They were protesting. They were shot. That's why Kebi Mapaswe was shot. He was running away from those horrible conditions. So when Benson said that we went that side, we are not in that number. And I can tell you, the question of immigration in South Africa, it starts as early as about 1800, when they discovered gold, when they took our land. These multinationals, Dutch East India companies, and all the companies that came after them. So the Zulus in KZN would not work the farms that they used to own. That's why they brought in the Indians. People in the Northwest, they could not work the mines that they used to own. They said, no, we're not working, because this used to be my mine. How dare, you enslave me now as an employee? Guess who they brought in? They brought in foreigners from Botswana land, from Rhodesia, and that agreement with those governments, it continued even after they had a liberation. That's why you'll find a president like Mugabe. He said he won't be a frontline state. Actually, he hated the ANC with passion. He even fought Joshua Nkomo, saying that they must get rid of the MK military soldiers. So Puza did the same in 1982, because they were looking after their interest. Same as the people of Lesotho in 1985. They were looking after their interest. They said, no, South Africans must go. That's why people like Chris Hani, they were betrayed. Chris Hani was arrested in Botswana because Botswana, post-liberation, they were looking after their own interests because, of course, they depended on South Africa and other things because they are a landlocked country. They needed, to go to the harbor and all that. But they looked after themselves. They put themselves first. Zambia did the same. Zimbabwe did the same. And South Africa today is saying, you know what? Guys, we've been supportive. We've accommodated you since the 1800s. And mind you, South Africans, they never said, people from Zimbabwe, Lesotho, they are traitors, even though they were traitors. Because if I'm on strike and I refuse to work, you bring in replacement labor to work. What is that? But we accommodated that. That's why I'm going to tell me it was bad. Those who wanted, to stay behind post their liberation, they stayed. Those who wanted to marry our sisters, they married our sisters. But we're saying post-1994, that, arrangement cannot happen, where we must carry the burden of other countries. Zimbabwe must take care of its own. Yes, we can support them, when it comes to trade, certain things like about Jubilee 2000, I think it was about Njongonkulu Ndungwana, they were going to United Nations saying, cancel the debt, don't impose sanctions. Even some, I think there was movements as far as they used to go there to United Nations and say, the case of Zimbabwe is a special case, it cannot be punished. So South Africa has done a lot, and we cannot be expected, to carry another country where somebody, if he's pregnant, he must jump the border, come here. And it's very funny when he says they live under sanctions. But the top ZANU leaders, even Mugabe, when he needed medical attention, he went to these European countries until they blocked him. Then he started to go to China. Even Rutendo is here most of the time. While the majority of the people in Zimbabwe, they suffer. They took majority of the land in Zimbabwe. Why are they not working the land? They expel the very same whites that they are following here, the very same white that they want to work from. Instead of working the land, because you'll think that after taking the land, the most natural progression or natural thing to do is to work on the land, farm the land. They've got gold, they've got diamonds, they've got platinum. What are they doing with it? In fact, they are pushing this cronyism, pushing, their comrades, of ZANU-PF, into strategic positions. So South Africa cannot be used, like it was used in the 1800s. South Africa must take care of its own, like Zimbabwe took care of its own. When Robert Mugabe came in, he says, no, South Africans must worry about their struggle. Lesotho did the same when Labua, Jonathan was even taken out of power by Lechanya. I think that, I'll end there for now.
Thank you. So Rutendo mentions the point of agreements being made historically for us to have borders, whatever the case may be, colonial borders, and whatever agreements we had during liberation struggles. I'd like to hear your thoughts on who should be having these conversations now, because his request is we should be doing the same, having agreements of we will take care of Zimbabweans or other foreigners that want to come here if they have adverse situations at home. The question for me is who should be having these conversations, because there were clearly certain individuals and groups in the past that made certain agreements. And today, here we are now. Who's meant to be having these agreements of whether we allow Zimbabweans and other foreigners in or get rid of them?
It's very fun when you talk of agreements. And you remind me of these Nigerians, guys who are here. Normally they say it Nigeria, they used to donate money for South Africans. That's a 419. They must produce paperwork. Even Rutendo speaks of billions that he cannot prove. There are no receipts, there are no paperwork. It's easy to mention billions and agreements that they've made, with the ANC. And remember, this country don't only belong to the ANC. There's so many people who fought for the liberation of this country. There's the BCM, there is the PAC, and South African people, if there were agreements, they were never consulted. But, nevertheless, we're saying, as countries, we can trade with Zimbabwe. As much as we play soccer now, we play with Zimbabwe as like South Africa versus Zimbabwe. Even with trade, somewhere we'll compete with them, but they cannot, overburden us. With the population of Zimbabwe, all of them coming here, out of 14 plus million, half of them, they are here. We're saying it's too much. We cannot cope,
Who's meant to make these decisions?
The decision about?
About whether they should be here or they should leave.
The government of the day must make those decisions. You cannot just welcome anyone. Our labor laws, our immigration laws must still be adhered. Same as Zimbabwe. They have expelled the ANC guys who went in there. They told them in their face that Zimbabwe is not a province of South Africa. South Africa is not a big brother. ZANU-PF, normally says that. There are so many people who went to Zimbabwe without papers, and recently we had Dr. Maling, without papers. He was kicked out. There are so many people, journalists going there. If you don't comply, they kick you out. But you must also, make sure that we implement our laws. We cannot just come here to fry chips, But at the state level, we can trade with them. They've got gold. We can do other things, to mitigate their circumstances. Like now, I believe that they do have, companies that they did not have and the retails that they did not have, in the past, coming from South Africa, some going to Nigeria, but ShopRite, the banking, people used to bank Kumatras. So now at least they now have banking system, a sophisticated, the software, and we've given them education. Abu Mugabe used to come here, go for it. What more can South Africa give? South Africa cannot give to the whole continent, because as a country, when you have a manifesto, you're saying, I'm going to create jobs. I'm going to better the hospital situation. I'm going to, make sure that you've got an infrastructure. If you don't have borders, it means now that you must cater for the whole continent, because the whole continent will come here. Like we've seen people, when they're pregnant, when they need medical attention, they come here. They just show up, and because of our constitution that it's so liberal, that says everyone, who deserves or who requires medical attention must be treated. Everyone who needs a house and must be accommodated, because it has this everyone. While Zimbabwe's constitution, it has a citizen. There are certain rights that you cannot have, if you are not a citizen. And this issue of Berlin Conference about borders, we've always had borders. There is no way that, people, they've lived without borders. So long as there's mankind, with my house starts there, it ends here. This is my terrain. Even in my house, I know this is my cup. That's a border there. I know this is my teaspoon. I know this is my chair. We have borders everywhere. People are divided by rivers, by language. Even them, they don't get along with the Ndebeles in Zimbabwe. The Shonas and Ndebeles, they've got borders. And some of the borders, are mental. Some of the borders, are by conduct. People are divided by river or rivers. They're divided by mountains. They're divided by language. They're divided by common interest. You normally said shared values. Sometimes our values are not the same. We're divided. So I don't see anything wrong with being divided. Obviously, it doesn't mean good. If I'm Ndebele, I cannot help a Shona guy when he's lying there on the floor. But, a gun must not be put, against my head to go, do 1, 2, 3. This is what the Zimbabweans are doing. They're saying, you must do this. They come with this entitlement culture. You must do this. That's where, the wheels comes off. You cannot tell us, you cannot dictate to us what is it that we must do. Even if they've helped us in the past, of which they've done very little. Our people had curfews. They were kept in camps. Only maybe a few, Slovo, they moved around.
Can you just name one camp in Zimbabwe where South Africans stayed?
You kicked us out.
When?
The camps, you kicked us out in Zimbabwe.
When were you kicked out?
You kicked us out in 1980 when Zimbabwe took over. Mugabe said, you know what, there's, what's this, in Bulawayo, because the MK guys were deployed there, in Bulawayo. You said, who's this guy, Joshua Nkomo? Must get rid of them. Zebra, must get rid of those guys. That's why the Kukura Hunzi also started, because you wanted MK to leave Zimbabwe.